friends. Welcome to Nerdy Bitz, TLDL, Too Long Didn't Listen. I'm your host, the Reverend Tracy, and this is where we take one study, one concept, or one piece of psychology and break it down so you get all the nerdy good stuff without the textbook hangover. This episode is about something you've almost definitely experienced, even if you didn't have a name for it at the time. You open your phone, start scrolling, and within a few seconds, you come across something that immediately pulls you in. But not because it's interesting in a neutral way, because it feels frustrating, unfair, or outright infuriating. You feel a quick spike of emotion, and suddenly you're no longer casually scrolling. You're paying attention. That moment is what people are now calling rage bait. So the question is not just what rage bait is, but why it works so reliably. Why does it grab your attention so quickly? And why is it so hard to ignore once it does? The short answer is that it's not random. It's built on a very well-established pattern in how your brain processes information, specifically something called the negativity bias. This refers to the tendency for your brain to prioritize negative information over neutral or positive information. In simple terms, your brain is more sensitive to what's wrong than what's fine. This isn't because you're overly negative or doing something incorrectly. It's because your brain is constantly scanning for potential problems. From an evolutionary perspective, paying attention to threats mattered more than paying attention to neutral or pleasant things. If something looked dangerous, missing it could have serious consequences. So your brain developed a system that flags negative or threatening information as more important, more urgent, and more deserving of attention. The problem is that system doesn't turn off when you're in a modern environment. When you encounter something online that feels outrageous, unfair, or emotionally charged, your brain doesn't pause to evaluate whether it's actually relevant to your immediate safety or well-being. It simply registers that something is wrong and prioritizes it. It increases your attention, it increases your emotional engagement, and it makes it harder to move on. Once you understand that, the next layer becomes clearer. This isn't just something that happens occasionally. It's something that systems have learned to take advantage of. We now operate in what is effectively an attention marketplace, where content is competing for your focus. In that environment, what keeps your attention wins. And what keeps your attention most effectively is not calm or balanced information. It's information that triggers a strong emotional response. This is not limited to individual content creators. It extends into how information is structured more broadly, including news. Psychotherapist Kimberly Wilson talks about how modern information environments are shaped by engagement, not neutrality. When engagement is the goal, the content that performs best is the content that activates you. And when you combine that with negativity bias, the result is a steady stream of information that is more likely to feel urgent, upsetting, or high stakes, whether or not it actually is. To make this more concrete, imagine scrolling past two pieces of content. One is a balanced, measured explanation of an issue. The other is framed in a way that feels unfair or provocative. Most people will stop on the second one, not because it's more accurate, but because it activates the brain's attention system more strongly. That activation is what keeps you there, and over time, systems learn to prioritize content that produces that effect. Up to this point, this is mostly about attention, but there's another layer that matters just as much, which is what happens with repeated exposure. Your brain is not just reacting to individual pieces of content in isolation. It is also adapting to patterns over time. This is where the concept of the chronic stress response becomes relevant. Research in this area, including work from neuroscientists like Bruce McEwen, shows that when the brain is repeatedly exposed to signals it interprets as stressful or threatening, it adjusts its baseline. That adjustment does not mean that your brain is being damaged in a simplistic sense, but it does mean that the systems responsible for detecting threat and generating emotional responses can become more active, while the systems responsible for regulation have to work harder under constant load. In practical terms, that can look like increased reactivity, a shorter fuse, or a harder time disengaging once something has your attention. The key point here is that your brain does not require a physically present threat to activate the system. It only requires something that feels like one. If you are repeatedly exposed to content that is framed as urgent, unfair, or alarming, your brain processes those signals in a similar way to how it would process real-world stressors. Over time, that can contribute to a general sense of being on edge, even if nothing immediate is happening in your physical environment. This is where the experience many people have starts to make more sense. If your information environment is consistently highlighting what is wrong, broken, or threatening, your perception of reality can start to shift. Things can feel more chaotic, more hostile, or more overwhelming than they actually are on average. That doesn't mean that negative events aren't real. It means that the proportion of negative information you're exposed to is not necessarily an accurate reflection of the full picture. So when people say that everything feels intense or that it's hard to look away from certain types of content, that's not a failure of discipline. It's a predictable outcome of how the brain processes information combined with how modern systems deliver it. Negativity bias makes certain content more attention-grabbing, and repeated exposure to that kind of content can keep your brain in a more activated state over time. What you do with that information matters. This isn't about avoiding every difficult topic or disengaging from the world entirely. It's about recognizing what is happening while it's happening. When something immediately triggers a strong emotional response, there is value in being able to pause and ask whether the urgency you're feeling is coming from the situation itself or from how it is being presented. That moment of awareness creates a small amount of distance between you and the content, and that distance is where choice exists. You can choose whether to engage further, whether to keep scrolling, or whether to step away entirely. The system itself is not designed to slow down, but your interaction with it can change once you understand the mechanisms at play. That being said, you can always hit the block button. So the takeaway here is not that your brain is the problem. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. The important piece is recognizing how that design is being interacted with in a modern environment that is optimized for attention. Once you see that clearly, you're in a better position to decide how you want to respond to it. And that's your Nerdy Bitz. Your brain is wired to notice what's wrong, and now you have a clearer picture of how that wiring is being engaged and what you can do with that awareness.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.